Intents and purposes versus intensive purposes. I know that for all intents and purposes is the correct saying, but I often hear /see people say /right for all intensive purposes. I was under the impression that the latter is completely incorrect, but when I discussed this with some friends we could not reach an agreement. Is intensive purposes considered correct even though it is a deviation from the original turn of phrase?
It's most likely a slurring of the original phrase, but for all intents of purposes does make it clear that only the most serious purposes are being considered. I would probably classify it as an eggcorn.
The original idiom is intents and purposes. Intents and purposes are both nouns in this case. With intensive purposes, intensive is an adjective that describes the intensity of the noun purpose. This chainsaw is a suitable tool for the intensive purpose of cutting down this tree. Versus, this chainsaw serves our purpose and is a suitable tool to carry out our intention of cutting down this tree. Does it serve your purposes and satisfy your intents? Or does it satisfy your intensive purposes?
For all intensive purposes is wrong. It was first written by someone who heard the phrase for all intents and purposes incorrectly. That is, it's something people who have misheard for all intents and purposes, but who have never seen it written, have started using. Its meaning, to the extent it has any meaning, would be nearly opposite of the meaning of for all intents and purposes. For all intents and purposes means, basically, amounts to, for all intents and purposes, they're married, means that they may not have a marriage certificate, but they behave and live as a married couple. Intensive purposes, to the extent it makes any sense at all, would be limited to a subset of purposes, i.e. those that are most intensive, whatever that might mean, rather than for all purposes and all applications, i.e. intents.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.